So Patti, I was really excited to be able to have Dickson on to talk about his really incredible technology with his printer cable.
That is one of the coolest things I think we've ever talked about, James. I'm like so excited to see, the uptake on this because it's a no-brainer.
It is. I mean, long story short, our audience, you can go sell restaurants now. You can flip them, whether they're on NCR or Aloha, doesn't matter. You can flip the credit card processing and just install a little printer cable, and it's amazing. So they're going to love that. And then tell us about the Insider's Report, Patti.
We have an update on surcharging. This time it's surcharging for ATMs. I think our listeners are going to be really interested in seeing, where Visa and MasterCard are being pushed on this. And then I really loved your questions from the field, James. I thought it was so insightful.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're talking about selling options. So it's option selling. So instead of just all or nothing, trying to create options, whether that's cascading options or all at once, and even in customer support situations. So I really think it will help you to close more deals. We talk a little bit about the cash discounting, surcharging, traditional, and that approach, but even things like point of sale systems and how to really use options to get a yes more often than a no.
Yeah, and our podcast today, as in the last several weeks, is sponsored by NMI. You can visit them at ccsalespro.com/NMI. You ready to go, James?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay.
Welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast.
All right, everybody. Today we are here with my friend Dickson Chu. How are you doing today, Dickson?
I'm good. James, how are you?
Doing fantastic. So really excited to have this conversation today. Dickson is the chairman and CEO of a company called Copper Inc. And today, Patti and I are going to be discussing how to integrate payments with literally any restaurant, even if they're using one of these old, systems, point of sale systems. And so it's really an amazing technology. And we're going to be talking about that today. But before we do, we would love to get a little backstory. So Dickson, just tell us, how did you get into this space? How did Copper come to be? Give us a little background, if you would.
Yeah. I hate to divulge my age, but I spent over 30 years at the intersection of financial services and data and technology, right? Sure. And when I ran across the two guys who were the original founders of Copper, where they invented this little gadget, I said, I know exactly what to do with that. So, the kind of problems that I've always tried to solve using technology in the past, I'll give you a couple of examples. So, right after the eBay acquisition of PayPal, I got recruited to create a merchant services business unit while the rest of the company was focused on getting PayPal onto eBay. Yes. So, in a 6-year period, I was fortunate enough with a great team to get from like almost nothing to $1 billion in top line revenue at PayPal, built out merchant services, bought the VeriSign gateway business. So that's one example. I left PayPal and joined Citi to go create a digital payments business. And it was at that point that, this is in the Wayback Machine. We partnered with MasterCard and Google to create Google Wallet 1.0. NFC was going to take over the world, right?
Right.
Pay. I remember we had our first locations at the Duane Reade on Lexington Avenue, all kinds of things. So I've been in the middle of trying to bring new things to the market to solve persistent problems, right? Yeah. And when I saw Copper's technology, I said, look, it's been forever that merchants are frustrated with the fact they cost them a lot of money to have a POS system. It works great. It does everything they need to run their business, but then the systems are intentionally designed to inhibit choice.
Right.
If you're a merchant, you don't get the free choice of, I got a better rate. Can I process for someone else? Right. I don't like the guy I have now. Someone else is going to give me better service. Right. Or I'm way behind. I'm going to start getting penalized on EMV compliance or fallback compliance, but the systems are set up not to either, hey, we have a solution for you, but you're going to pay us a whole bunch of extra to get there, or we can't really help you, but maybe your bar can do some custom work for you, right?
Right.
Well, what we did was we invented an ability to get data and therefore transactions out of any POS system to give the merchants choice. And I think that's like a big problem that's persistent and that we're trying to solve.
Yeah.
At the same time, if you're a payments provider, you're out there working hard, right? You're knocking on doors, You're trying to get a new account. You sell them that you're going to be a better price and better service, except a few things happen, right? The merchant said, great. I can't afford to switch. And my servers love the NCR Aloha that we have in place.
Right.
So I don't want to have to retrain them. Can't we keep that? Why don't you talk to my NCR value-add reseller to come and update the machine I have with your new VAR sheet, your mid and all that.
Right.
So ISO calls the VAR. Guess what? The VAR is someone who owns the merchant account that exists there in the first place. So they're never going to cooperate with you.
Right.
And then even if they didn't, they're going to say, hey, we'll get around to it. It'll be a week, 2 weeks. And by the way, I'm going to charge you money to do this 10-minute update, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard anything from $500 to $3,000 to do a VAR sheet update. Well, I mean, this poor guy is working his butt off. He's out there selling these new accounts, and now he can't break through. Guess what? Now all you have to do is show up and say, look, we're all set, and we're going to get you up and going by just installing this smart cord, replace the dumb printer cable you have, enroll it to Wi-Fi, and then Copper routes the transaction to the new mid, and the bar doesn't even have to, it's no more the wiser. The merchant's happy because everything works exactly the way it's always worked. Servers don't have to learn anything new. I mean, it's a long-winded thing to explain what we do, but at the very beginning, one of the co-founders, what he was trying to figure out is there are all these POS systems. I'm sitting here, I've been waiting for my check for 30 minutes. Why can't I just pay for it on my phone? And that sort of started his investigation.
Really? That's interesting. So that's what that was the problem that he was solving that kind of started the wheels
rolling.
And then as you peel back the onion, he realized, there are over 100 different POS brands in restaurants. That's a lot of integration to do. And so he came around to, well, all we really need is access to the data. So how do we get the data? So that's where we discovered that the printer port is universal, right? Every POS has to print the receipt, and it's either going to conform to Epson standard or it's going to conform to Star Micronics standard.
Right.
And so that sort of started.
There's really only two different kind of data formats. And in a way, I'm sure there's variations from the systems and what they send, but
essentially that's it, right? I mean, every POS brand is going to be slightly different in terms of how they work with that protocol.
Right.
And so what we've done is we've built a very smart engine that learns. Right. And whenever we encounter a new POS brand we haven't seen, it takes us 2 weeks to process, observe that data, and then we build a new component to support that brand.
So, all right, so let's do this. So, I love that you're already diving into the details because that's what I was going to ask you to do anyway. This is this is very different than our normal interview because it's such an innovative technology that I'm afraid our audience, if we don't start off with just explaining what it is, they're not going to have an idea what we're talking about today, right? So this idea is that I go into a business, I go into a restaurant, they have a point of sale system, and I'm just going to swap out the printer cable, the cable from the point of sale system to the printer.
Yep.
And that's going to work. So dive into a little more detail for those of our audience that have no idea what we're talking about and explain how is it that by swapping the printer cable, I'm now able to process payments through my payment provider instead of the one that's integrated with their POS system?
Yes, that's a great question. So we built something that is essentially a embedded computer inside of a printer cable, right? So you swap out the dumb printer cable with our smart cord. And what it is in the first instance, it always acts like a regular printer port. So print jobs will just go through.
Right.
But there's actually a single chip computer that's built in that talks Wi-Fi. And so it's a simple Apple-like experience to enroll our computer to the local Wi-Fi. Once enrolled, it becomes a thing on the internet. It was all the rage a few years ago. IoT. Well, we're basically an IoT device.
Okay.
That's now intercepting everything that's printed from that POS. It still acts like a normal printer,
That was my question too. Yeah, okay.
We're also capturing, intercepting all that data and sending it to our cloud. And so here, hence, we're an IoT platform. And what it's doing is when it's in our cloud, we take that data, we parse it out, and we say, okay, here's what the line items are in it. Here's the server's ID, the table ID, and all that. And we actually, in real time, create the receipt that the printer expects to see, that server normally sees. So that's that part of it. But because we're collecting the data and we're actually creating the receipt, in e-commerce terms, think of us as like the shopping cart. When you check out on Amazon, when you check out at a website, you put all your items in that cart and then you say pay, right?
Right.
We're that cart. And so when you're ready to pay, we then, like every other shopping cart, will pass the data to the appropriate party that we're partnered with. And so this way, we're in the front of that funnel, and we can send the payment request, the transaction, to whoever is our partner.
Got it. So let me zoom out for 1 second and let me say it again.
Yeah.
And the way I understand it, and then correct me if I miss anything, Dickson. So I just want to make sure our audience really gets this. So let's break it down like an actual transaction, right? So I'm a customer now. I go to a restaurant and I want to pay for my bill. So what happens is that the server is going to go back to their legacy point of sale system, as you mentioned, like an NCR or something like that.
Yep.
And they're going to, they already have the items in there, and they're going to say, okay, it's time to pay.
Yeah.
And when they do that, what's going to happen is the data, which includes all the items that they purchased, it's going to go into that printer cable for the purpose of printing it. But instead of it just printing it, instead it's first going to send it through the cloud up to your system.
Yep.
Your system is then going to do two things, as I understand it. Yep. Number one, it's going to send a signal back down to say, okay, go ahead and print a receipt.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And that receipt is even going to have, I believe, a QR code on it.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. So we can inject anything we want because we're creating that receipt.
Right.
So there's two payment things that happens when the server prints the ticket. So you're done with your meal, you ask for your check. Server goes back to the point of sale system, print check for table 5. The check is now printed. Like the server's no more the wiser. New check prints because they're going to put it in the little cover thingy and bring it to the table and present it to you as your check, right?
Right.
Except now what's happened is the check has a QR code at the bottom. Okay. Now at the same time, the server may have a handheld device like a PAX 8920 or a Clover Flex for checking people out at the table. Mm-hmm. So now the experience is you ask for your check, she prints the check, comes to the table with a little carrier and your check with the QR code at the bottom, but also let's say has a PAX 920, A920, and she says, hey, you have 2 ways to pay. Totally contactless. I mean, it's quite topical now with COVID and so forth. Like just open the camera on your phone and scan that QR code and you can check yourself out. You'll get a digital receipt. Or I can check you out right here. She'll call up the same ticket that's on the device, show you that same thing that you're looking at on paper. You say, yep, that's my order. Add tip, simple, button, add tip, tap the card, tip the card, done. Now the magic is if you pay on the device, the restaurant now has the benefit of fully EMV compliant transaction.
Uh-huh.
Right? If you pay with the QR code with the scan, everything's all digital, and it's also a 3 secure transaction, so they get liability check.
Right.
And so it's ironic that if any of us, and I've traveled all over the world, like the U.S. is the only country left where when you ask for your check, the server doesn't come with a device and check you out.
You actually get a check.
You get a check, and then what happens is they run back. They have to go do other things. They come back after you've inspected and left your card. Then they grab your card and go back to the point of sale, run the transaction. And if it's an older point of sale, chances are they're running MSR magstripe,
right?
Non-EMV compliant.
Right.
Reprints that to bring it to you so you can write in your tip amount and set it up. And then she grabs that and goes back to the POS to have to close the order, right?
Yeah.
we cut like 2 steps out, or from a customer standpoint, I probably save some frustration, and when I'm ready for my check, I'm pretty much ready to leave.
Right.
Instead of waiting another 15, 20, 30 minutes,
Right.
I get my check and I'm good to go.
Well, it kind of leads into a question that I had, Dickson, and I think you kind of answered it, but let me just throw it out there in terms of, it seems to me that the draw for the restaurateur is fewer steps, therefore more productivity. Is that what you think would intrigue them the most, or is there something else in it?
I think it's 3 things.
Okay.
The first one is make more money. How did they make more money? Well, you took some steps out, you made them more productive, so therefore more table turns.
Right.
More table turns equals more money. The second step is they save money. How do they save money? Well, as you guys know, this EMV compliance has been around for 6 years now, right? This mandate. But now 2 things are happening. Visa is assessing a 10-cent per transaction fallback penalty if your transactions exceed 10% of there's a penalty. And then some of the processors are charging up to like 62 basis points per transaction as a non-compliant penalty. So you're sitting there as a merchant and you're saying, well, wait, it's going to cost me thousands of dollars to do this upgrade and all that, and they postponed it. Well, with me, for very little money per month, you're going to get compliance, so you're going to save money. And the third is probably as interesting or as important as everything else is, remember, the server is now not running back and forth 2 or 3 times. And by the way, our data from our own experience at deployments has shown that when the server shows up with a device to check you at the table, she's seeing anywhere from 16 to 18% higher tip amounts.
Wow.
So less work. She's not running back twice. And she's getting more higher tips. So, hey, if she's working less, getting paid more, there's a good chance if you're the restaurant owner, she's going to stick around. So you don't have this labor problem that is plaguing everyone. So make more money, save money, happier employees.
And I would think there's also a customer satisfaction thing in terms of, I personally don't like giving my card to somebody who's going to take it in the back and maybe loses it, or it sits there at the cash register for 20 minutes while she's serving a bunch of other people, right?
Right. I mean, like I said earlier, I mean, in fact, I was just out to dinner with my family last night, and nice meal. Everything was great. When you ask for your check, you're kind of ready to go, right?
Right.
Well, first of all, I got to flag the person down. They come over, they bring the check, and then they run away because they're busy, right? Which, I don't fault them for that. But I'm kind of ready to go. And so now I'm happier if I didn't have to wait those 2 extra 20 minutes.
Sure.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and I think, what's interesting too, the one you guys didn't talk about is the one that our audience cares about the most as a benefit for the merchant is the savings from switching payment processing providers, right? So this enables them to actually save a lot of money potentially by they've been locked in with whoever they're using on the POS integration side. And as everybody in our audience knows, if a merchant's locked in with a POS provider for processing, price increases will happen because they're locked in.
I mean, I won't name the company, but it seems to be a prevailing practice now where there's a company disguised as a point of sale company, but they're really a PayFac for a very big processor.
Right.
And they say, hey, we're going to give you the hardware for free, and you're going to have all this great technology on the POS side, but you have to exclusively do your processing with me.
Right.
Well, once you sign that exclusive contract, by the way, they're free to raise the rates as often and as much as they want, which they literally have been doing.
Right.
And so if you're the merchant, I mean, these restaurateurs work hard and they have really low margins.
Right.
Yeah. What we're all about at Copper is how do we give them choice?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So let's. Oh, go ahead.
Can I throw in one more question, James, if you don't mind?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, because as Dickson pointed out, things like pay at the table are relatively new here in the U.S. I mean, at least from the consumer perspective. I'm just interested if you have any stats on how technology like copper is affecting the consumer experience. I mean, we just talked sort of anecdotally. I'm just wondering, is there any data on that?
We're collecting it.
Okay.
I mean, Patti, to be fair,
It's fairly new, right?
yeah, we're a 1-year-old company,
Okay.
but we're getting a lot of demand. And so a year from now, I hope to be able to come back to you and say, look, I've got 500 locations and here's the data that says higher tips, faster checkout, all that.
More loyalty, all that kind of stuff. Sure.
Yes.
I got you. Okay.
I put anecdotal, well, it's not even anecdotal, like this whole QR code at the bottom of the receipt.
Yeah.
We think
That's
it's cool, right?
Yeah.
But you go to Asia. I mean, I was in Beijing a couple of years ago, and everyone is either doing Alipay or WeChat Pay, right?
Mm-hmm.
No one has cash anymore, and they just scan the QR code to pay.
Right.
I just sort of say, well, 1 billion people can't be wrong,
right?
Yeah.
It is
that trend is on the way.
It is interesting how the QR code is. I mean, it took COVID to even get the QR code into the consumer vernacular in terms of going to a restaurant and pulling up the menu, right?
Right.
And I remember the first time I did that at a restaurant, I'm like, so do you have a QR code I can use to pay? And they kind of looked at me quizzically.
Well, now you can't.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So, all right. So let's transition a little bit. I do want to talk about the server. You've already touched again on a lot of this, Dickson, but let's kind of brush over this again.
Yeah.
So from the server's experience, one thing I'm interested in is, let's assume a restaurant doesn't want to change anything. They still want the server to run back and forth and do all this because they're not comfortable with pay at the table. Right. I mean, I'm assuming they could just use their A920 where they normally would swipe it.
Yep.
So, it seems like they could do that, but can you talk a little bit more about the server's experience with this? What are the pros and cons? What's their experience like?
Yeah. Great question. So there is a minor bit of retraining or behavior change, right?
Sure.
So the server, instead of running back and forth, which they're accustomed to, they're now, armed with a handheld device that they can just check out.
Right.
And like all things, human nature being what it is, it might take, a couple of times before they say, wow, why would I do this any differently? Like, I don't have to go back and forth. And by the way, in every restaurant that you can think of, I get that experience. The server, by the way, has to close that check before they're able to check out of their shift, right?
Right.
So now they're either going to run back and forth and close the ticket, which by the way, we still require, right?
Sure.
Or what's beautiful is if they're checking out with the device, for instance, all those transactions are queued up on the device for them. So they could, at their break or at the end of the shift, just call up all their closed tickets and just close it off in the POS. And by the way, the only reason you're closing it out of the POS is so that accounting at the end of the day can reconcile all the transactions that were entered with the payment transactions from the merchant account, which we facilitate. Because we don't integrate to the POS technically, we can't post the transaction, automatically close it out. Most of the servers we interviewed have said, no, we don't actually want you to automatically close out a transaction because once you close it on the POS, it makes the table available for seating.
Right.
Mm.
And so we've spent a lot of time trying to make this as consistent with the way they normally work today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But with a bunch of, efficiency savings.
Yeah. Interesting. So, I know we've touched already on pay at the table. We talked about that a good bit. I want to get to a question here about the agents and ISOs.
Yep.
Right. So we've been talking a lot about this. Hopefully our audience, I think, has a pretty good feel for like what we're talking about. I'll go ahead and throw a link out there right now. It's just ccsalespro.com/copper, COPPER. We worked together on a merchant sales insight recently. So we have a link there that they can go to learn more. But I think they get it. The idea is, from the perspective of the agent and the ISO, all restaurants are now fair game. You go out there, you sell them. They think they're locked into their current processor. You put this magic little smart cable in there between the POS and the printer. You take over the credit card processing, send the transaction to both a receipt that's got a QR code and send it to a different device like an A920 or others. I know you work with Clover Flex and a few others. So they can send it to a device like that to complete the transaction in that way. But now let's talk about a little bit more of why would they do this? So talk about the agents and the ISOs you've been talking to. What are their pain points? What are their pros and cons with this technology?
Well, I think that, it's a very competitive market, right? I don't have to explain that to your audience. And increasingly, the likes of Toast and Square, they're increasingly a threat.
Yeah.
Right. They get into the restaurant first. I'm going to replace all this hardware. I'm going to do the processing and so forth. But, guess what? 80% of the market is still legacy POS systems.
Right.
Aloha, Micros, Heartland, Dinaware, you name it.
Right.
There's something like 120 POS type brands serving restaurants in the U.S.
Right.
Right.
How these guys get all the airspace. There's still a long tail of a lot of merchants, right? But you're out there, as I mentioned earlier. Why should an agent or an ISO care? Well, you've done all this work to make the call, to get them to agree to your new service and your rates and everything else. And the first thing that happens is you have the barrier. Now I've got to deal with the bar.
Right.
Is he going to come and update that bar sheet in the POS or not? And what are they going to charge me? How long is that going to take? In our case, we're going to save you money. We're not charging you anything, right? Because they don't have to be involved. And two, we're going to save you time because once you have your merchant account signed and your deal done, just go in and replace the cord, roll the Wi-Fi with our smart cable or smart cord, and we'll start sending you the transactions. You're up and running.
Yeah.
So, in a high level, stepping back, it's going to allow you to penetrate accounts that you otherwise had a hard time or are impossible to penetrate.
Yeah.
And we deliver a more elegant solution. Now, that's for the core processing. The other two things that you get, well, one thing, I guess, is incremental revenue. Well, how do you do that? In about 2 weeks, we're going to roll out a new feature, which every agent I've talked to in the last 5 months have asked for, which is built into our checkout process will be cash discounting.
Yep.
Excellent.
Now they can sell that as an incremental feature.
Right.
Make that automatic.
Yep.
Right. Obviously, it's a premium service, so we'll charge a little bit of money for it, but they're going to make so much more money. The other thing is you're going to help your customer be EMV compliant. Right. So, at the end of the day,
you're saving that money.
Are finally ready to upgrade. Who are they going to call? They're going to call the VAR who never helped them in the first place?
Right.
They're going to call the agent who's there as their partner delivering these value-added services.
Right. Right. So Dickson, do you actually charge a fee then for this capability? Is that where your money comes in?
Yeah. So in the first instance, we don't sell the cord. The hardware is free.
Okay.
Right. That just enables the service to happen. And we charge a monthly SaaS fee subscription.
Okay.
Either per location if they have a lot of POSs or per POS.
Okay.
Right. And that's something we negotiate with our partners. So my go-to-market is through resellers like agents and ISOs.
Right.
So I give it to them with a buy rate.
Gotcha. That's what I was going to ask.
Whatever they want in terms of passing that through, marking it up, or absorbing.
So there's an income opportunity there. That's what I was trying to get at, right?
Correct. Yeah. Both an income opportunity, then immediate term, and then definitely income opportunity with the likes of cash discounting.
Sure.
Other value added services that we can continue to offer to our partners.
Love it. I'm glad you brought that up, Patti. That was good. I think it's basically, if I could summarize all this into a sentence for our audience, you can now go sell restaurants like you sell everybody else.
Yep.
Go sell them credit card processing. After they say yes, you swap the cable.
That's it.
Like, it's insane. One thing you did mention that I wanted to clarify, because I know a lot of our audience, when they heard you say it, there was a word you said a minute ago that interested them, and that was the word toast. Can I get some clarification on that? So you're saying that the copper cable would now allow somebody in our industry to potentially use their processing with a toast point of sale system in a restaurant?
Maybe. I didn't say that exactly.
Okay.
Say they're competing with for an account.
Yes.
next to the toast rep is saying, hey, rip and replace, I'm going to give you all this great stuff.
Yeah, sure.
They can show up with my solution and in less time and way less money offer a lot of the same features.
Okay.
Right. Without the restaurant having to change everything. Right.
Got it.
So there's that. The other piece is, remember, we are completely POS agnostic.
Sure.
So yes, can we take transactions out of a toast system? We absolutely can. I would say, just to be completely transparent, caveat emptor, the merchant needs to look at their toast contract if they're already on there to be clear about what happens if they violate the exclusivity contract with toast. And the penalties are pretty severe.
Sure.
And so we're just a technology provider.
Got it. I understand what you're saying. So basically what you're saying is there's no specific technology hindrance of being able to take an existing toast customer and flip the processing. The problem is contractually they may be obligated to toast and they need to speak to a legal professional about that.
Correct.
Got it. Understood. Cool. Well, this has been super interesting. I know our audience is loving it. So I did already give out one link, which is ccsalespro.com/copper. That's all lowercase COPPER. That actually will take them directly to your page to learn more about it. But where else would you send them, Dickson, if they want to learn more about you or they want to learn more about Copper?
I would say you can look at our website. And by the way, we're growing so fast that we're barely being able to keep up with updating the site. So I'll apologize in advance. It's not what I want it to be, but it's not bad. So usecopper.com, USECOPPER.com, or just send an email, info@usecopper.com, and that'll end up on my desk as well as my sales team's desk.
Got it. And that was usecopper.com, USECOPPER.com. Fantastic. Great information, Dickson. Really appreciate you taking the time. I know I didn't mention it earlier, but the Merchant Sales Insight that I did with you is right at the top of most downloads of any that we've done. So I know our audience is super interested. I know you have a lot of interest in what you're doing. So thank you for taking time to come share it with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to talk to you this morning, James and Patti.
Thank you.
So Patti, today, as we talk about our sponsor, NMI, and we give out the link, of course, ccsalespro.com/NMI, all lowercase, I want to point out an obvious one today.
Okay.
Selling card not present merchants.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it seems so obvious, and yet I would be willing to bet that 80% or more of our listeners right now are not proactively targeting card not present merchants.
Which is such a huge market now. I mean, it's just been ballooning in the last 18 months.
Yes. And I think a lot of times there's maybe a concept around this that that means we're talking about SaaS or e-commerce, but it doesn't. In your local market, think about all of the home service providers. I know we've had Ron Rice on here several times talking about that, but your plumbers, your electricians, your
contractors,
HVAC,
right.
And these are smaller merchant accounts in some cases, but a lot of times they're doing $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a month in transactions. And you can use NMI and their incredible dashboard. You don't have to do any API integration or no, you just set it up. You create a merchant account, you send your merchant a little invite, they set up an account, they can log into the dashboard, you can impersonate them and help them. It's actually an amazingly simple design. And I think NMI has moved on to all these incredible technology things today where it's easy for people, our listeners that maybe aren't as familiar with NMI, to kind of think, well, that's going to be complicated. But no, they also have this really super simple dashboard where they can go in, put transactions in, they can save customers and set up payment plans and charge them later. And they really did a great job of thinking through, email invoicing and just all the little basic things that you need as a card not present merchant. So for those of you that haven't done so already, if you'd like a market that's not nearly as competitive, go after your card not present service providers in your local area. And I would highly recommend partnering with NMI by going to ccsalespro.com/NMI to start that partnership.
And now, here is Questions from the Field with James Shepard.
So Patti, today in the Questions from the Field, I want to talk about option selling and how important it is to have this concept of option selling. So first of all, let me define it, and then I'll dive into some thoughts on how to do it better.
Sure.
So option selling is basically the opposite of going in with one concept. So when you go into a business and you say, I think you should buy this point of sale system. I think you should do this feature. I think you should have this pricing. I think you should have cash discounting, whatever it is, right? You're going in and saying, this is what you should do versus going in and saying, there are 2 or 3 options that I think you should consider.
Gotcha.
Let me know which of these is best for you.
Right.
Should we do this? Should we do this? Should we do this? Okay.
Which sounds like it should be the way we do it.
Yes. So a couple of things about it. Number one, I'm not necessarily advocating for the idea of leaving the decision to the prospect, leaving the important decision to the prospect. Sometimes it makes sense to do that. Whenever it does make sense to do it, but
Right.
sometimes it doesn't. What I'm advocating is that you always want to create the illusion, at least, if not the reality, of multiple options that the merchant will choose from.
Sure.
Okay. The reason behind this is psychological. It's not logical. It's not that, you definitely want to give them multiple options because then they're going to make the right choice. The idea here is you want to give them multiple options because they're going to be a lot more likely to say yes. Okay.
Sure.
So the idea is you just have to figure out when we're coming up with these options, are we talking about really important things or less important things? So whenever we're going to pitch something, we're always thinking about, I want to include some options into my value presentation, into my opening pitch even. I want to include options because I want to give the merchant the opportunity to say yes to something, right? So the question is, where can I include options? Well,
Sure.
Maybe you're selling a hair salon and you know that you're going to sell them on a Zuza point of sale system or a Clover with a certain app that you have. And there really aren't any options there, like that's just what you're going to do. Okay. Well, then how can we create options? Well, maybe we create options around the features. So maybe we ask them things like, when we're talking about, online scheduling, how do you want to have your online scheduling structured? Do you want to make it available, or do you want people to have to call in and talk to somebody and then schedule it on the device? And so, even though, again, that's more of an illusion of options because it kind of like, who cares? You're going to install the system. They can do whatever they want. But by presenting those options, number one, it's going to distract from the main point and it's going to assume that they're moving forward there.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
And it's going to give them more opportunities to say yes. So now instead of going to them and saying, hey, I really think this point of sale system is the right one with this pricing and these features. What do you think, Mr. Merchant? Well, now the merchant's going to think, wow, this is a big decision.
Right.
I need to think about it. Or, well, maybe they just say no. Maybe they say yes. You don't know what's going to happen there. Instead, you might say something like, I've done a lot of research. I've worked with a lot of hair salons. I am confident that this is the right point of sale system for you, but I do have a couple of follow-up questions.
Right.
If you were to move forward with this point of sale system, would you want to have the online scheduling? Is that something that you think would be valuable to your customers, or would you prefer to have people just call in and talk to somebody on the phone to schedule the appointment?
Sure. I get it. Yeah.
So I don't even give them the opportunity to really respond to the main thing, which is the point of sale system. And instead I divert their attention to a lesser, question mark, right?
Sure.
Another good example of option selling where it's actually something really important. I've talked to a lot of salespeople. A lot of them are going to listen to me and disagree with me on this, but I still think that there are a lot of markets and verticals where option selling makes sense with cash discounting.
Okay.
So I really believe that there's, going after a new vertical or a new market where these concepts of surcharging, cash discounting are relatively new. And there's not a lot of momentum there. I really think going in there with traditional, compliant surcharging, and cash discounting as 3 options.
Okay.
And presenting those to the merchant and saying, basically, it's a foregone conclusion that you want to work with me. I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you save money now. I'm going to position you to be correct in the future. But I do want to present 3 different pricing options for you, explain them, and then tell me what you think about it. I want to get your feedback. I want to know what's going to work best for you. Here's what they are. 1, 2, 3.
Right.
Which of these sounds best for you? And you can, a lot of times in a market where cash discounting is not the thing yet,
right,
you can get them on compliant surcharging with, especially a larger ticket where you're saying, well, they can use their debit card and not pay the fee. And that's enough to override their objections around, well, my customers are not going to like it. But unfortunately, a lot of salespeople, they're not doing that, and they're going in and they're misunderstanding that their market's not ready for just full-blown cash discount.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying, well, hey, I'm doing great. I'm selling two, maybe 3 sales a week on cash discounting. Well, yeah, but you're getting 30 people that are just telling you no right off the bat because they hate the idea.
Right.
If you at that point said, well, what about surcharging? So you can do option selling.
Traditional?
What about traditional? You can do it in several different ways. So option selling, you can present all the options at once. That's a really popular way. The other sales strategy or tactic you can think about is doing it as a cascading options approach. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So you let people know we have several options for you. I personally think that cash discounting is the right option. Let me explain why. And then when they say no, and you do your rebuttals to their objections, et cetera, but you realize that's not going to work. You say, okay, well, as I said, there are other options. Let's talk about the next one. What about surcharging? Let me explain how that works and how that would address your concern. No. Okay. Well, there's one more option. Let me talk about what we can do with traditional processing. So the idea is you can present all the options at once, or you can do cascading.
Right.
But it's all psychology. It's the idea of you don't want to back yourself into a corner where you're going to get a yes or a no and then you're done. Right. You want to make sure you've got somewhere to go and give yourself some room to breathe when you're trying to make a sale. And so by presenting a lot of different options, that's helpful. I would even go so far as to say in customer support situations, this is almost more important to have options. Too often it's like the merchant's upset and it's like, well, here's what I'll do. I'll do this.
Right.
Well, what if they don't like that solution? It's a lot better to say, there's a couple things I could do for you. I've done this so many times. When I was selling full time, your schedule just gets eaten alive by customer service, And until I had hired somebody to help with that, it was like, oh my goodness. And what I started doing is I would give people options and I would say, here's what I can do. I'm about 45 minutes away from you right now. I can drop everything I'm doing and I can drive to your location right now. If you feel that your concern is that urgent, I'm happy to do that. The other option would be I could come later today and change my schedule this afternoon and stop by. I'm happy to do that. The third option would be we could schedule a meeting tomorrow at any time that works for you, and I will adjust my schedule accordingly. Which level of urgency do you think best fits your circumstance?
Yeah.
You know what I found? Almost everybody said tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And before I was doing that, I was just saying, I'm going to drop everything and come right there. And they're like, okay, great. But they didn't really need me to do that. That's just what I was doing. And when I gave them the option, they appreciated that. And then I appreciated it because I didn't have to change my schedule for the day.
Yeah. So like you're sitting in church and you get this thing. I remember you telling me one time you get, you could say, okay, well, I can leave mass right now. Or
right. Like, well, the pastor seems like he's coming into the runway pretty soon here. I'm not sure. Do I need to get up and leave? I'm sitting in the front row here, which I have done, I will admit. But so yeah, I think the options are always crucial when you're trying to get people to make a decision you want. Go with options. It'll help you.
Go with options. I mean, I'm a firm believer. I always love options. Putting a new furnace in, I want 2 or 3 options before.
Right. Give me some bids.
That, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's the same thing when you're selling to a merchant.
Yep, absolutely.
Good stuff, James. Thanks.
This is the Insider's Report with Patti Murphy.
So, everybody, I wanted to share some news from litigation land this week.
Awesome.
A group of ATM ISOs, led by the National ATM Council, has scored a win in its efforts to overturn Visa and MasterCard rules they assert amount to price fixing. Now, the case has been languishing in the courts for over a decade, and it centers on around ATM surcharges. The details kind of take us a bit into the weeds. It took me a while to sort of sift through all the legalese to kind of understand this, but I think this breakdown should explain it to everybody. As you know, surcharges are imposed when a consumer uses their debit card at an ATM owned and operated by someone other than the card issuing bank. And these fees can amount to $3 or more per transaction and are the bread and butter of ATM ISOs and in many cases store operators who install the ATMs. Now, under Visa and MasterCard rules, in order for an ATM operator to offer services to Visa and MasterCard cardholders, they have to agree to impose the same surcharges as they do for other cards. In other words, a consumer withdrawing cash from a non-bank ATM with a Discover or Star card, for example, which generally costs less to process, has to pay the same surcharge as someone using a card with a Visa or a MasterCard logo. So they either have to charge everyone the same lower fee or the higher surcharge. Now, according to the lawsuit, independent deployers account for about half of all ATMs in the U.S., or about 200,000. And they want to use differential surcharging, as they call it, which more adequately reflects costs. But absent that, there's no competitive marketplace, they claim. In their lawsuit, they allege that MasterCard and Visa rules amount to price fixing that artificially inflates the fees consumers pay to use ATMs in violation of the federal Sherman Antitrust Act.
So if I can pause you for 1 second.
Sure.
So I think I understand. So what you're saying so far is Visa and MasterCard debit cards,
right,
might actually have a higher underlying cost to process versus maybe a Star or a Discover
Nice
or
whatever, Pulse, whatever. Yeah.
Right. And so if they run it on one network versus another, there would be a different cost.
Right.
But Visa and MasterCard have said, if you're going to accept Visa and MasterCard cards at this device, at this ATM machine, the surcharge has to be the same regardless.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. I got it.
Exactly.
Let's make sure I understood so far. So.
Yeah. So no, like I said, it's a bit in the weeds. I mean,
Yes.
it took me a little bit of,
But I think there's going to be interesting. I don't know where you're going with this, but I think there's going to be an interesting side note here for some other things I care about. So that's why I was curious.
Yeah. And I figured there were, and that's why I wanted to report on this.
Right. Sure. Okay.
And as I said, this case has been languishing in the courts for more than a decade.
Sure.
And even made it all the way up to the Supreme Court at one point, which sent it back down to the lower courts. And it's been sitting on a docket at a federal court in D.C. since 2018, waiting to be certified as a class action lawsuit. Well, that certification came through in August, and now the case can proceed, although Visa and MasterCard have about 60 days to challenge that class action status.
Wow. I wonder if they will.
I wonder if they will, right? Like I said, it's been 10 years, and they've thrown up roadblocks every step of the way. But anyway, the class defines itself as 350 non-bank ISOs that are sponsored by one or more banks that are registered with Visa and MasterCard. And it covers the period running from October 2007 through to present day.
Okay.
Now, they're not saying exactly how much they expect in damages, but they say it mounts into the millions of dollars, which
of course
easily it can.
Right.
But I just wanted to throw out a couple things. Jonathan Rubin, who's a D.C. attorney representing the ISOs and NAC, I found this quote from him from 2011. He said, quote, "Visa and MasterCard are the ringleaders, organizers, and enforcers of a conspiracy among U.S. banks to fix the price of ATM access fees in order to keep the competition at bay. Were it not for these anti-competitive rules, Visa and MasterCard would face real competition for ATM services. Consumers would pay lower prices for using ATMs, and more ATMs would be deployed," is what he said. Now, considering how long this case has been languishing, and with Visa and MasterCard challenging every step of the way, it's anybody's guess when the case is actually going to get a hearing. But ATM ISOs are bracing for a victory. And what brought this to my attention is that NAC took a bit of a victory lap, proclaiming its success in getting class action status back in August. Sending out press releases. I noticed the Green Sheet picked it up. Digital Transactions picked it up.
Sure.
It's, and I think, as I'm sure you want to interject at this point, it all goes to the whole issue of Visa and MasterCard's control over surcharging.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the reason their victory lap may be a bit premature as far as actually getting what they want.
Sure.
But I don't think it's premature in terms of that they will eventually win.
I think so.
And I think, it just goes to show that I think the courts recognize and have already recognized and continue to recognize that this idea of, pricing freedom when it comes to payments and incentivizing customers to use certain forms of payment.
Right.
That exists entirely within the purview of the merchant's free speech rights.
Yes.
ISO's free speech rights.
Right.
ATM providers' free speech rights. Like, we're talking about how we communicate our pricing, and the idea that Visa and MasterCard have acted in a way that's anti-competitive. I mean, wake me up when something new happens.
Right.
This is a well-known. It's not like any judge is going to look at this and say, oh, "Wait, I've never seen this before." It's like, no, this has happened. There's this over and over and over again. Every court has ruled. Obviously, there is price fixing. Obviously, there is anti-competitive practices. I don't necessarily fault them for it. I mean, they're the gorillas. That's what
if you can
do.
Get away with it, why not?
Right. That's what you do.
Right.
But they are doing that. And so I think that the interesting thing is seeing the trends, and I'll be interested to see how this one plays out, because there could be some interesting language in the ruling, that would further impact this whole, argument around credit versus debit, or surcharging this type versus another type. And even I know there's ongoing legislation you've talked about as far as this issue of, off-network transactions that are not on the Visa network or MasterCard network versus on. And so this just plays into that whole narrative.
Into that whole narrative. I mean, to me, it's like they just keep on coming and coming, and it's like these last gasps of trying to, we're going to hold on to. We got to at least hold on to one of these rules,
Right, and for as long as possible, and I think they have done a fantastic job at that. They'll continue to do it, and the truth is, whenever things don't go their way, they find a way to do something else on the other side to make up the revenue anyway and the profit. And so, it's fine. But I think it is an interesting one. So I'm sure you'll keep us up to date on that.
Oh, for sure. Who knows? It may be 6 months or 8 before we hear anything else, but I'll be sure to let everybody know.
Awesome. Thanks, Patti.
Sure.
Thank you for listening to the Merchant Sales Podcast. Whether you are an industry veteran, processing executive, or just trying to learn about the payment space, we appreciate your time. The Merchant Sales Podcast is a joint production of greensheet.com and ccsalespro.com, and we hope you will tune in next week for more information and tips on building your merchant services business.